very interesting book, Fed Up and Swearing.
First thing they do is phone their mum.
There's this slight childlike wonder in the way he describes Damien Hirst at the Groucho. Soon I was trying to explain where Jupiter was.
Welcome to This Bit's Brilliant. I'm Simon Q. Elliott.
And I'm Paul Ging.
This is the podcast all about brilliant books, bit of sport, bit of music, bit of anything we fancy, frankly. And Paul, it's one of yours this time, so what you got for us?
It is. It's a book I picked up, a bit of a bargain. Was this Alex James, bass player from Blur and bit of a blur. As you can probably see from the sticker, which I couldn't remove actually, it only cost me £2 in hardback, which is not a reflection on the contents at all.
It doesn't feel like he's getting a massive cut of that.
No, probably not. He probably got paid and it's the retailer that's taken the hit. But it's a very interesting book. Good summation of what was going on at the time in the 90s from his point of view, with a fantastically appealing, almost childlike way of looking at things, which I thought was quite good. Talking about the early days of Blur, obviously, and then what happened once he was famous, and he was famously quite excessive. Now he's calmed down in middle age and got 3 or 4 children and makes cheese or something. But he was certainly living a life. He's living a good life now, but he was living a different life back then when he was 30 years younger. But it's
rock star's a different life from cheesemaker. Okay, mate, we'll go with that headline.
It certainly is. He talks here about when they first got into EMI. They'd been signed. They were on an independent label called Food. Food sort of made a deal with EMI, distribution, all that sort of thing. And suddenly they found themselves at the EMI sales conference, which is at the beginning of the 90s. He mentions Iron Maiden. So I think, given my very detailed knowledge of the Iron Maiden back catalogue, that would probably make it 1991 as they were running up to their new album coming out. But he says, Iron Maiden drove onto the stage in a bubble car and started swearing at everybody. Damon had a funny turn and ran outside. I was having an excellent time. There was a party in every room in the hotel. Nigel Kennedy, a strange kind of violin-playing arch yobbo, says Nigel was trying to throw a television out of the window of the first room I went into. A lot of men in suits were laughing. He fell in a heap on top of the telly before he got to the window. It was good in that room. I sat on the bed sharing a bottle of scotch with a guy with a silvery beard who seemed quite interested in everything I had to say. We shot the breeze for ages. He knew all kinds of things. I liked that guy. We drank all the whiskey. You can see what I mean about the childlike. Not that many children drink whiskey.
No, yeah.
Hopefully not. Eventually, I said I'd better go and find Damon, who had last been spotted in a field trying to talk to some horses. Andy Ross from Food Records said, what the hell were you talking to Andrew Pryor about for an hour? I said, who the hell's Andrew Pryor? I've been drinking whiskey with me mate over there. He says, that's Andrew Pryor, you Burke. He's head of the label. I'm lucky if I get 30 seconds. And his payoff line is, I suddenly had a feeling that I might be able to do all right in the music industry.
He's got the gift. Another
good descriptor of this is the first time that Blur go to New York. And he says, after the first American show in Boston, Damon and I flew down to New York for promo. Just the two of us. We were a 4-piece band and I always felt slightly peaked when I was left out. We were constantly jockeying for position. That's what gave the group its dynamism. But lately, the other two were unbroadcastable, so they were happy to stay in bed. I don't know if he means unbroadcastable as in not very good quoting or just fed up and swearing and shrugging their shoulders. Maybe a combination of all of those things.
Yeah, kind of sounds like the second one, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can imagine someone like Graham Coxon not being particularly communicative after a while. He says, there was a white stretch limo in New York waiting for us at the airport. It was full of booze and televisions and phones. I called my mum. I said, it's all fine. I've moved out of the squat. I'm in New York in a limousine. So he obviously hasn't phoned home for quite a while. The band have sort of taken off. And
it's such a cliche that. I mean, it's like someone gets in the limousine in the 80s or 90s and there's a phone and the first thing they do is phone their mum.
Yeah, it's a bit.
It's all right, Mum. I've made it, Ma. Top of the world.
There's a car phone, you know. I don't know if it's still used as a name, but for many years, the car phone warehouse was a brand name
Yeah.
and like an anomaly for a long time. I think it spoke to people of sort of like, you know, a bit of privilege and having cracked it somehow, you know, if you had a car phone.
Car phone warehouse said if you come in here, you're a yuppie.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was a little bit late to the mobile phone revolution, about 4 years later. I remember my brother was literally the only person I knew who had one. He's still got the same number. It's the only mobile number I actually know off by heart as a result.
I got a couple of mates like that. Go on, what else you got?
Anyway, they do a trip to Iceland, which seems to have been quite a big thing for them. I think Damon Albarn has still got a house up in Iceland now. But he says, it's hard to stay really alive to keep really stimulated. Hedonism is a full-time job. To keep finding new ecstasies and not get stuck in old routines takes all of a man's might and the world's serendipity. Iceland is somewhere else altogether. It has different geography from the rest of the world. Doesn't look that big on maps, but when I got there, it was gigantic. It's got big weather, distant horizons, and hundreds of miles of nothing at all. It's not built on a human scale. Trees are usually there to help put things in proportion, but there aren't any trees in Iceland. It goes straight from little bushes to huge mountains and volcanoes. It's quite a new place geologically, submarine volcano not long ago at all, and it's still a planetary building site. It's topsy-turvy. The water is either frozen solid or streaming, and the landscape with its petrified lava flows gives an impression of fluidity. There's a lot to unpack there. He starts off with this childlike wonder and then moves into sort of geography lesson. Quite interesting. So I
Yeah.
the way that he seems to be absorbing all of these things with this, it's sort of a child's curious eye is the way it strikes
I
me.
was going to say that. There's an element of, I heard him interviewed on Steve Lamacq, probably a year or two ago now. And it was the whole band, but whenever it came to Alex James, it was kind of like, yeah, this is great, isn't it? There's a bit of me that finds that frustrating and sort of going, come on, mate, be deeper into it. And there's also quite a bigger part of me that goes, that's exactly what I'd be like.
Yeah. It's almost though that with him, the novelty hasn't worn off. I mean, Damon Albarn is one of those people. He often seems, just because you're famous and successful doesn't mean that you have to be happy. And I understand that that is the case. But, I'm not having a go at him for occasionally complaining, but for somebody like him, being a star has not been like a magic bullet that's made him like
Yeah.
be happy or anything. That's fair enough. That's part of the human condition. But I think with Alex James, he's still just awesome. He's one of those people who being famous really suits them. It's sort of,
Yeah.
he's one of those rare people who doesn't complain about the downside of fame and the double-edged sword. He just seems to have just had a riot all the way through.
I love the people who enjoy being a rock star because they're living our dream. It's like people who are sports stars and enjoy it. You just sort of go, mate, you're living our dream. At least look like you're having a good time.
Yeah.
I think it's why people warm to Dave Grohl so much, because despite all the stuff that's happened, most of it nothing to do with him and one or two things he's screwed up himself, you just sort of think you make being a rock star look like fun. Or, sportsmen like Freddie Flintoff or Ben Stokes, they just look like they're enjoying being there.
Yeah. The contrast between Grohl and Kurt Cobain in Nirvana, it couldn't be more.
Yeah. Although Grohl obviously absolutely adored him. Time for a word from the book sponsoring us this time. And The Sun Shines Now by Adrian Tempany is the most important book about modern football he's ever read, according to David Peace, the author of The Damned United. Frank Cottrell Boyce called it brilliantly written, bold, important, honest and gripping. Search for The Sun Shines Now by Adrian Tempany. This episode is also sponsored by King's Gold, the heart-stopping thriller from Simon Q. Elliott. Two of Captain Tom North's soldiers try to kill him. Journalist Henry North is shoved in front of a speeding van. The brothers need to find out who's trying to kill them and why before the murderers succeed. 800 years ago, England's crown jewels were stolen. There's still a price to pay. King's Gold by Simon Q. Elliott. Search for it on Amazon. So sorry, you were saying, go on, there was another bit there.
Yeah, so the trip to Mexico has a similar bit of wide-eyed wonder. And just it's the observational detail is also very funny. Mexico is one of those places where you sit on a plane for 10 hours, and when you arrive, it's still the same time it was when you left. En route, there was quite a lot of speculation about what to expect. Dave, that's the drummer, said you couldn't have a bath because things swim up your bottom and lay their eggs. The tour manager warned us about getting kidnapped or arrested, which amounted to the same thing. There was talk of feral children living in sewers and bandits who'd shoot you for your shoes. I thought maybe I'd take it easy in South America.
That makes a lot of sense. I think taking it down a notch when you're in South America is probably a good idea.
Yeah, but they also talk about the sort of growing pains of success, but not in a aforementioned moany way, oh, I've lost more privacy or anything, just in a sort of really practical way about how when you're in a band at a sort of very low level, as I was, it's a bit like a gang. You know, you've maybe got one person who's got a token permanent girlfriend, but mostly you're just hanging out in the pub together.
I think it's that thing, isn't it? It's, when we talked about Brett Anderson and Suede, you were talking about whether or not he found his tribe. And I think, lots of people find their tribe in sports teams, other people find it in music, and whether or not it's being in the band or just being in the crowd, they're your tribe. And actually, it's a brilliant thing to suddenly belong.
Yeah, it is. It is. And he talks about how that gets disrupted slightly when they make it. He says, until this stage, the band had all lived within walking distance of each other. But around the time the first album, Leisure, came out, we balkanized. Graham moved to Marylebone, which was still in walking distance, but he went to the pubs there mainly. We'd always gone to the same place as before. Damon went west to Kensington, where the pubs weren't very nice, and Dave went north to Archway, where they were really horrible. Now, having been living in London in the same phase, I think that's all pretty true. It also speaks about a level of in a band that I didn't get to, where suddenly everyone's like, but you do in a stage of life just with a normal gang of mates, don't you? Where your gang is not splitting up necessarily, but calming down and settling down and moving away from each other and developing their own life and contacts and relationship and that sort of thing. So it talks about that, but it must be even more sort of confusing and disorienting if you're already in a band and sort of in the public eye. You may remember that he did have a couple of high-profile friendships with like sort of famous people. Damien Hirst, the artist, was one of them. Keith Allen was another one, and they were a little trio of musketeers.
So was Alex James the key to those relationships then? Because I kind of remember, in my memory, it was Blur and those people were friends, but actually it was Alex James.
I sort of remember that a bit at the time, but also this is confirmed by another book I've got, which is a sort of which we'll do at some point, which is about the 90s, which is just takes it's not written, it's just quotes. So it's people from the 90s in their own words, and it's as well as Alex James and there's Noel Gallagher, obviously Patsy Kensit, James Brown's in there, all these sort of people, and it seems to confirm that. He says that he meets Damien Hirst at the Groucho, and they get chatting, and again there's this slight childlike wonder in the way he describes that first conversation. He said, I liked Damien's questions. They were unusual. Soon I was trying to explain where Jupiter was, because he's an amateur astronomer. Damien liked the fact that Jupiter didn't have a surface. Something about a surface was very exciting to him. It was to me too. I was drawing him a map of the solar system, and he was making me laugh. So that was the sort of basis of one of their, rather than sort of chin stroking around a shark in formaldehyde, it was this obviously probably slightly drunken conversation in the Groucho. And
I mean that sounds drunk, doesn't it? Have you ever been to the Groucho Club?
Yes, only once though, and I was very obviously.
Yeah, me too. I've only been once. Go on. When did you go?
I went in 2003, and I was so obviously on good behaviour that I was sticking out like a sore thumb. I was quite clearly not a regular. I was quite clearly someone who'd be going back there, which has transpired to be the case 22 years later. But at least I can say I got there. But a regular, I was not. It was a dip into another world.
No.
You know, you and
I went not long ago, and I was kind of interested because it was kind of like the Groucho Club, and then I went in and went, oh, it's like a sort of nice hotel bar,
yeah,
or a series of nice hotel bars and restaurants.
yeah. It wasn't. I was expecting it to be like Saint-Tropez in the early 70s with Keith Richards or something, and it was nothing like that.
No, it wasn't when I went. So sorry, go on, mate. What else you got from the book?
Yeah. So anyway, he talks about the first day that they went to the Brit Awards. So I think this is 93. He says, on the day of the Brit Awards, I had breakfast with Mike Smith, my publisher, as I often did. He was nursing an extra spiky headache and trying to draw me. He always had a sketchbook with him in his satchel. He was perpetually losing that bag, however. He left it in Freud so many times they had a special place behind the bar for it. You could tell if he had a big night by whether he had his bag with him at breakfast time. He always got it back by mid-afternoon, although sometimes it took all morning to locate when he really should have been trying to sign the Cranberries. Quite often it turned up at the Bull and Gate in Kentish Town, so that was always a good place to start looking. You get the sense that they're still friends from that. But yeah, I dare say the music industry is, even on my limited experience, it's sort of awash with people like that. But I love the idea. He should have been trying to sign the Cranberries. Not necessarily the Cranberries, but that sort of thing.
Yeah, he should have been busier doing something like that.
Yeah, exactly. He also talks about meeting up with Keith Allen, who's one of those people who just seems to have been around forever. And they're all together in the Groucho Club in matching suits at 9:30 in the morning. I suspect that they haven't gone there at 9:30. It was 9:30 because they'd been there all night. So there's an interesting here about one of another trip that they're into New York, and at a do somewhere on a rooftop. Things were really spiraling out of control. Now, given everything that's gone before, that's quite the statement in this book. As the sun came up, Keith, Damien, and I burnt the backs of our wrists with hot lumps of charcoal from the barbecue on the roof. The circular scar was the sign of the Embers, a select brotherhood about which I can say no more, as it is highly secret. Damien's girlfriend Maya wasn't allowed to join the Embers, but she wanted to join in, so she burnt the back of her heel. Our friend Charles, the chef, was eligible for Embership, but he didn't go through the ritual. Later, he got drunk and used a cigarette. That burn gave me jip the whole weekend. By the time the show opened, I'd been up for 3 days and I had pus dripping down my left hand. The art gallery where the show was rammed with gruesome New York high society at very high frenzy. It was like Harrods on the first day of the sales. They pushed and they shoved, and they were every bit as grotesque as the people at the football match in Belgium that I'd been to. There was a girl called Fanny. She'd written a novel. We left right away. We went back to my hotel room at the Mercer and we danced to the Bee Gees. So many of the great episodes of my life have been interspersed with the music of the Gibb Brothers. We went out for breakfast and I put on a train to Brooklyn. I had a bad case of the horrors and went back to my room to die. He says, to my surprise, when I got to my room, Keith was in my room, tucking into a room service breakfast. He was wearing a pink suit. I wanted to know how he'd got into the room, and he said he'd told reception that he was my boyfriend. He had some vodka with him, and that took the edge off everything. He never felt any shame, did Keith. He was never horrified about anything he'd done. He had absolute faith in his every action. His company was just what my screaming super ego needed. So we walked round to the Soho Grand in the sunshine, comparing burns.
That's proper, like, rock star experience. The rest of us just aren't really going to have times like that, are we? And
No.
it's like, and that's actually, it's kind of why I love a lot of the books that we read, is that they open the door to this world that you cannot possibly imagine.
Yeah.
You know, when we talked about James Brown's book, the Loaded Guy, and he talked about a night out with Helen Mirren and dancing with Prince. You just sort of go, yeah, I'm not ever having that life. I am jealous as hell, but I am happy to read about it and laugh.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we've had some big nights out and everything, but for people like this, it's sort of that all the time, which is,
Yeah.
I wonder how I mean, obviously there've been a lot of rock and roll casualties, but it does seem amazing, really, that people like Alex James and Graham Coxon and all these people and Damon are still sort of around. The drummer Dave Rowntree has always struck me as a sensible type, and then you've got people like Keith Richards who are still going strong, and then it's on the other side.
Keith Richards is the ultimate example, isn't he?
Yeah. On the flip side of that coin, you've got somebody like Jimi Hendrix, who was apparently not a nutter, and just had one bad night out, and he's out the game.
Yeah.
Only 27 years of age.
It's all just random luck. Actually, funnily enough, I heard a podcast the other day where what's his name, Dave Rowntree, the drummer from Blur, was talking about his new book. It's a brilliant pod called Talk 90s to Me with Miranda Sawyer, and he kind of struck me as someone who just kind of wandered along through it and went, it's interesting and cool, but I'll still be fine, you know?
Yeah, I think he just had his head screwed on. But is his book another memoir?
No, it's a photo book, and it's from when they went on their very first tour to the States. And it's I mean, from what I can tell, it sounds great, but it's we'll give it a little while to settle down to see whether it's still around in a year or two, and we think it's worth doing.
Yeah, what I'd like to do at some point, though, just to fit in with Bit of a Blur, is the Graham Cox count. And to see, I had this experience at a wedding last summer where all the members of this old band that I'd been in happened to be also at this wedding. And we're all talking about an event in common. And all 5 of us had a completely different recollection of the events. Which is a natural human thing. I was reading this thing a while ago about Roger Waters, who, of course, was with no disrespect to the others, the main writer in Pink Floyd, I think it's fair to say, until he left. But he said that he remembered doing quite a lot of the work for something like their famous 1973 album, Dark Side of the Moon, on his own. But whereas Nick Mason, the drummer, said, "No, I was there when you were making that tape, and that those sound effects that sound like Are You Being Served at the beginning of Money," and he was there. Perfectly possible that he was, because we know it's a scientific fact that the human brain takes things, changes the order, and restitches it, usually to fit your own perspective or your own agenda. A good example, I think, that we can all relate to is that sometimes you'll watch a film after 10 years, and a certain scene will be completely different from the way you'd remembered it.
Yeah.
The film hasn't changed. Your brain has changed. This is my rather long-winded excuse for wanting to do another Blur book at some point soon. So, in a nutshell, Alex James, bit of a blur. Obviously, it is all a bit of a blur for him, but he managed to get his version of events down in this book, full of very funny, pithy lines. You don't necessarily, it helps to be a fan of that era. But as I say, we've said about a few books that we've done, it's just a good record of the era and very evocative of what was going on at the time.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate.
Thank you. See you soon.